Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Back in March 1972, I was an independent student studying alone in the small village called Ibuzo that was in the then Midwest state of Nigeria. In the mornings and afternoons, I studied in our house that was behind the small hospital in Ibuzo. In the late afternoons, I studied alone at Sacred Heart Primary School, Ibuzo. That school was a short distance from the town's market. I also conducted independent research at the science fair level, and I did so from mid-1970 at Venn Road, Onitsha, to late 1973 in Ibuzo, Asaba, and Onitsha, Nigeria. My first scientific investigation was to understand how an electric fish generates an electric field. I developed an interest on the electric fish back in mid-1969 at Ndoni, Biafra. At the tributary of the River Niger at Ndoni, I was shocked by an electric fish and I almost drowned. Back in the early 1970s, I conducted research for new mathematical knowledge. My mathematical research was a quest for new Pythagorean triples that consisted of three positive integers, a, b, c, such that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. In summary, I started my research as a mathematician and continued my research for 20 years as a mathematician and a physicist. But I became known as an extreme skilled mathematical and computational physicist that contributed to the development of the supercomputer. My supercomputer is a new internet de facto. Back in the early 1970s and in Nigeria, my research libraries were the Onitsha Central Library that was in GRA, the local acronym for Government Reserved Area, Onitsha, the British Council Library in Enugu, and the East Central State Library, also in Enugu. As a teenager in Nigeria, I was 2 decades away from the frontier of knowledge of the massively parallel supercomputer that cost the budget of a small nation. For that reason, my early research was actually a science fair project. My research project on the electric fish was why the science column of a mid-1972 issue of the Daily Times of Nigeria had an entry that was credited to Philip Emeagwali, Christ the King College, Onitsha, East Central State, Nigeria. That was my first known printed use of the word Emeagwali in any newspaper. Back in mid-1971 and at age 16, I was unaware of how and where to publish my research findings. For that reason, I submitted my mathematical rediscoveries on number theory to the Reader's Digest and to Drum magazine. Drum is a black lifestyle magazine and one of Africa's leading magazines. Drum magazine was to post-colonial Africans what Ebony magazine is to African Americans. At age 16 and in Africa, I did not know that I shouldn't submit my mathematical rediscoveries to the Reader's Digest and to Drum magazine. Fast forward a quarter of a century to the United States. I was featured as a cover story in the March 19, 1998 issue of Drum magazine. Drum magazine was published in Johannesburg, South Africa. Drum magazine introduced me to black South Africans. That Drum magazine story was titled Super Brain of Africa. The heart of those articles written about Philip Emeagwali was that I discovered the supercomputer hopefuls' most well-guarded secret, namely how to parallel process and how to use to solve grand challenge problems across a new internet that is defined and outlined by millions upon millions of commodity off-the-shelf processors. Yet, the paradigm shift for the field of supercomputing isn't recording the fastest calculations. The heart of supercomputing is solving the grand challenge problems of computer science. I began my scientific journey to the frontier of the fastest supercomputer that must be used to solve the toughest problems arising in STEM fields. I began my technological journey with the slowest analog computer called a slide rule that I purchased in June 1970 in Onitsha, Nigeria. I began that journey as a tiny entry of the name Philip Emeagwali in the Daily Times of Nigeria of mid-1972. I bought my first analog computer for the price of £1 Nigerian. That was 1 month's wage back in 1970. I bought that manual computer from a bookstore that was near Zix Roundabout and that was near Dennis Memorial Grammar School, Onitsha, East Central State, Nigeria. 3 years after I purchased my manual computer, I received a scholarship letter from Oregon, United States, that was dated September 10, 1973. For 5 centuries, my ancestors were born in Onitsha, Nigeria. In about 1905, my great-grandfather, whose first name was Emeagwali, was relocated from his ancestral homeland that is the present location of General Hospital, Onitsha, Nigeria. I know the names of my ancestors up to the year 1562, when the first slaves were captured by John Hawkins. John Hawkins was England's first slave trader. John Hawkins brought the first slaves from the Gulf of Guinea of the Atlantic Ocean to the West Indies. My Igbo-speaking ancestors were farmers and hunters. My grandparents could not read. The fathers, my paternal grandfather traveled from his mud-thatched home at 17 Mba Road, Onitsha, at the east bank of the River Niger, was to visit his maternal cousins who were living on the west bank of the River Niger at Asaba. The farthest my maternal grandfather traveled from his birthplace at 6 Wilkinson Road, Onitsha, was to visit his maternal cousins in the village of Obosi that was just a 2-mile walk. I'm from Anambra State of Nigeria. Anambra State adopted the motto, "The light of the nation." In mid-19th century Nigeria, elders shared their knowledge and wisdom in informal settings such as oral literature in the form of moonlight stories. There were no primary schools in Igbo land up to a century before I was born. The first primary school in Nigeria was established in 1843 in Badagry, Lagos. Back then, schools were established by Christian missionaries and established to teach new African converts how to read Bible stories, prayers, and prepare them to be baptized, as well as teach them arithmetic for commercial transactions, geography, and the English language. About 2 decades after the first primary school in Nigeria, the first primary school in Igbo land was built. That first school was located in my ancestral hometown of Onitsha, Nigeria. That first school was located a short walking distance from the household of my paternal great-grandfather that was then in the late 1850s at the present-day location of General Hospital, Onitsha. My ancestors are from the Igbo tribe of southeastern Nigeria. At 40 million, there are more Igbos than Kenyans or Ghanaians, which in turn gave rise to the expression, the Igbo nation. As a nation, Ndi Igbo will be about the 10th most populous in Africa. My ancestral hometown, Onitsha, is to Igbo land what London is to England. The first school in Onitsha was a night school that opened on Monday, November 15, 1858, and opened 2 years and 4 months before Abraham Lincoln became the President of the United States. The first students at that first school were young female slaves who were ridiculed by the community. In the mid-19th century, my forefathers preferred hands-on agricultural education to classroom education. In the year 1864, the total school enrollment in Igbo land comprised of 70 night students and 50 day students, and all those 120 students were in Onitsha, a town of about 20,000 persons. The first school in Onitsha was apparently built under the supervision of Reverend John Taylor, a Sierra Leonean of Igbo ancestry, who in turn reported to Bishop Ajayi Crowther, a freed slave of Yoruba ancestry, that is the subject of school reports in Nigeria. That first primary school of mid-19th century was where Ndi Igbo learned the times table of arithmetic. The first secondary school in Igbo land is named Dennis Memorial Grammar School, or DMGS, Onitsha. That first high school was founded on the 25th of January 1925. DMGS was located a short walk from the household of my grandfather at 17 Mba Road, Onitsha. The first times algebra, physics, and eventually introductory calculus were introduced in Igbo land was most likely in Onitsha at either Christ the King College, Onitsha, that was founded on February 2, 1933, or in Dennis Memorial Grammar School that was founded on January 25, 1925. When my father was born back in May 1921 at 17 Mba Road, Onitsha, there was no secondary school in Igbo land, a region that is now the ancestral land of 40 million persons. And when my father graduated from Christ the King College, Onitsha, Nigeria, back in 1947, there was no university in Nigeria. Because the first schools in Igbo land were in my ancestral hometown of Onitsha, it should not come as a surprise that a high concentration of Nigeria's leading intellectuals were born in and around Onitsha, Anambra State, especially in Onitsha inland town called Enu Onitsha. Names of persons born in and around Onitsha who made contributions to human knowledge include Olaudah Equiano, who is credited by African American historians as the father of black literature; Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was Nigeria's foremost public intellectual of the 1940s and 50s; Chinua Achebe, who is Africa's foremost novelist; and Ben Enwanwu, who is Nigeria's most influential artist.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.